Hello and welcome to Soundwaves, the Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust's official podcast. My name's Scott, and this week we're doing something a little different. Typically, even though the trust is about what happens after cancer treatment, we don't make a huge fuss about the cancer aspect. There's no scheduled time on trips where everyone has to sit down and talk about their experience. That is fundamentally not the point of what the trust is about. But those conversations sometimes do happen, and they're led by the young people on those trips, not the trust team or volunteers or skippers. It's a safe space where they're among people who have gone through something similar to what they've gone through, quite often for the first time. And sharing those experiences is an important part of peer support. It helps people realize, in any scenario, that they're not alone. So it's with that in mind that this episode is dedicated to Sarcoma Awareness Month. We're going to chat with George, Chloe, and Lewis about their experience with sarcoma. George and Chloe were supported by the Trust when they were younger and are now volunteers, and Lewis came on his first Trust trip last summer. We hope this episode does what it sets out to do, raise awareness of sarcoma, but also that if someone listens in who is going through sarcoma, or if you know someone with sarcoma, that they know they're not going through it alone. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us this week. I think given the nature of Sarcoma Awareness Month, the idea of raising awareness, I think it'd be good to hear from each of you about why there is an awareness month and what awareness is needed, if that's okay. Could I just come to you first, George? What do you think?
Well, I think it's one of those cancers that's not as well known. So it's described as being rare, and it grows in anything from connective tissue to nerves, muscles, tendons, cartilage, and blood vessels. So it's despite being in the same group of cancers, it's quite a wide-ranging disease, as it were. So I had osteosarcoma, which is a type of bone cancer, whereas I've met people with all sorts of different sarcomas, like Ewing sarcomas and that sort of thing. Like the trust is, most of those have been through the trust, and so I think one thing that we all had in common was that we had no idea it existed when we were diagnosed, particularly because I was quite young. So I was 9 when I was first diagnosed. So I think it's something that needs to be recognised as can happen to a wide range of people and a wide age group, and things to just look out for, because I came home one day and it was just, my leg was very painful, and that's what basically kicked it all off. And so something as innocuous as that can actually be very important to consider the possible reasons for it. So I'd say awareness is always important with lots of things, but particularly something like sarcoma that's very rare, and not a lot of people are very educated on it. So I think it's quite important for people to know what it is, what to look for, and also just to understand that people who've had some form of sarcoma are still people, and we still like all the things that we always used to.
Chloe, what about you? What is it about the awareness of sarcoma?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, which is, I know osteosarcoma is more common, and then Ewing sarcoma, and then there's a few various other sarcomas. So I was diagnosed when I was 13, back in 2005. I'm now 28. And back then, I was a really sporty kid. So my symptoms were my leg just kind of, it was in my femur bone, so my leg, the thigh, just swollen up. It was kind of like a man's leg, not a child's body. And I didn't tell my parents for a while. I just thought it was to do with sports, or I pulled a muscle, and then the other symptoms, which I didn't realise at the time, were weight loss, and tiredness, fatigue, a bit of pain. But for me, it was more the physical size of it. And even when I remember I come home on a Wednesday from Rounders, and I told my mum and dad, and they were so oblivious by it. They were like, "Oh, we'll keep an eye on it." And by the Saturday, it just had this, when you're a teenager, you're growing so much anyways. And I think the cancer just had this massive growth spurt, and it just doubled in size. And I think because there was physically something not right, that led my parents to take me to A&E. But again, that day, I remember on a Saturday, I was going to the cinema with my friend, and my mum was like, "I'll go to the cinema and then we'll pop to A&E after." That's how chilled out we were. And when I went to A&E, they didn't really know what it was. I had an X-ray. Fortunately, I got diagnosed quite quick, within a week. I had an MRI, which really showed it, and then a biopsy at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital in Stanmore. And what I've learned now is that primary bone cancer is really rare. I think Ewing sarcoma affects 100 people in the UK a year. Doctors in their lifetime, they very rarely experience cancer cases, let alone bone cancer. So from the people I've met, a lot of people can be misdiagnosed a lot because it's not so prevalent. And for me, it was my parents that told me, and they said, you've got bone cancer and it's Ewing sarcoma. I think the word sarcoma you'd never associate it to cancer, but the word cancer's got such an emotional stigma to it that you just naturally, for me at 13, I just thought I was going to die. I didn't know kids could get it. You can get it in your bones. It was all very new for me. And I think from what I've learned now is, awareness is key, and there's a lot of research going, but I know the survival rate hasn't changed in the past 30 years. Which by now, how research advances, you'd expect there to be a bit more. So I think there's a lot more work to do. And I'm still learning now, but yeah, it's a completely whole new world.
Can I ask you now, Lewis, what do you think about the awareness?
Well, for my journey and my story, it was hard to be aware with what was going on because mine started back in 2014. I was just diagnosed as it was a sporting injury, a lump under my knee from physical sports because I was playing rugby and full contact football at the time. And 3 years was with, I had numerous amounts of doctor's appointments because of the lump, went to A&E several times and I was told the same thing. Eventually my knee started locking into place, which caused me to fall from the top of a flight of stairs in school straight to the bottom, which by that time my GP had given up. He sent me for an emergency MRI scan 3 years on, so in 2017 this was. Only supposed to be in there for 25 minutes, I do believe, and I was in there for just under 2 hours. I had a cannula stuck in both of my hands, and the radiographer said to my mum that he'd never seen a scan like it. So by that, you're like, right, this is something bigger than what we were initially told. Then I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which in myself, I didn't have a clue what that was. I'd never really, I understood the word cancer and obviously I understood what it meant, but me being in that situation, I didn't want to believe what was going on around me. So I kind of shut everyone out until I felt ready to take on board what that word actually meant. Going through my journey, I had numerous rounds of chemotherapy, which I was told in late October 2017 that it had completely failed. Instead of killing the tumour and taking the cancer away, it had helped it spread from the base of my knee to the top of my ankle, which the only way of me being able to survive was to have my leg amputated from above the knee, which I can honestly say was the best decision I will ever have to make in my life, and obviously the biggest decision at the age of 15, which was a lot to take on because I had obviously my mum by my side through the whole thing, but I was also with people that don't know the word and what it means. I was bullied by friends that I went to school with, and I was bullied out of school because obviously I was a lot different from other children with having an amputation. But with taking 3 years to be diagnosed, I do believe that different symptoms just need to be made aware that it could just be more than a sporting injury, just an accident, because I was oblivious to it. A lump just under my knee. I thought, fair enough. Obviously, I was told it was a sporting injury because I was still growing rapidly. But it's such small symptoms can lead to your life being completely changed, like it has with mine. Whereas I was playing full contact sports, I was running around completely oblivious to what was truly going on inside my own body. But it's hard to take on everything because it's not known enough. And especially with sarcomas, it's something so small and something that you wouldn't really notice if you wasn't paying enough attention can lead to something insanely bigger than you would have thought of.
I guess from hearing that, like, all three of you sort of reference the physical pain at the start of it. So it's about knowing the symptoms and knowing the signs of it. And because it is rare, it might mean that at first it's not really taken as seriously as it should have been taken by GPs or doctors, but also that it can happen to people who are young as well. People might not know about it. It can happen when you're early in life. But also, like Chloe was saying about, like, because it is so rare, there's a lack of maybe research involved as well. Because if the life expectancy hasn't changed over 30 years, like, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me like other cancers that has been improving. So it seems like there is a need for that awareness to do with both noticing the signs, but also actually getting more people talking about it, so there is better research out there. I guess for people listening who are maybe at different stages of their experience with sarcoma, or maybe they know someone who would find it helpful knowing, what kind of things did you wish you knew at the time? Can I just ask Lewis first, actually? What do you wish you knew when it was happening?
Honestly, I couldn't. Looking back on it now, there's questions that you feel as though you should have asked there, but you don't actually know what to ask. Like in myself, I felt cheeky asking certain questions, so I closed them away, and I let my mum do the talking. I was just sat there, all just quiet, smiling the whole way through, because it's hard knowing what questions to ask and knowing what way to word them, because obviously going to a GP and stuff like that, you feel as though, oh, they're going to know this, they're going to know everything that's going on, but they don't with certain cancers, so to speak, because of like how rare certain ones are, especially with like the sarcoma itself.
Chloe, what about your experience? Were there things you wish you knew?
Yeah, similar to Lewis, really. It's a difficult one. I think because I was 13. I mean, fortunately for me, I was diagnosed very quick. Within a week or two, I was straight in the Royal Marsden for chemo. And, I remember conversations, my mum and dad would do a lot of the talking, similar to Lewis. And I would sit there and, I didn't really realise I was on a treatment trial. I was on it's called Ewing 99 trial. And when you're in hospital, you don't realise, that you're on this set trial where, they're like, we'll try this chemo, that don't work, this chemo, you're going to have radiotherapy and then this surgery. And there's various, I mean, I still don't completely understand it now, but because you're in hospital, it just feels, you just want the consultant to tell you what needs to be done and you'll just go with it. But, one appointment, I remember them talking about the tissues in my leg. And at 13, I just thought of, Kleenex tissues you blow your nose with. Like, I just imagine my leg stuffed with tissues. I just sat through that whole appointment like, tissues, what is she on about? And it's only really now, as I say, I'm now 14 years from remission. I'm now at the point where I'm living longer from cancer than life before, which is like, pretty surreal. And it's only now I still have long-term follow-up appointments and long-term effects from the treatment, because it is so harsh and aggressive, that it's only really now I'm learning, and only really now that I'm answering asking questions. And my advice would be to anyone is that there is no wrong or right way, but what I've learned now, I've got more confident as I become an adult to firstly, really learn and understand what's happened, which I'm still learning, and then to ask those questions. And I've asked various questions about this trial that was on, what's the stats, the results from it. But then I was like, what am I going to do with that information? What caused it? They don't really know. Is it genetic? Is it not? I've learned a lot more about my leg. So I had like a limb salvage operation where they've taken out the whole femur bone in my hip and replaced it with a kind of internal prosthesis. And there's things now I didn't even know. Like, as a kid, I was so scared about having it done that I didn't even think about connect with a future with this leg, that if I'd be able to walk, if I could do anything again. So when I woke up, and it was a bit of a shock to not be able to walk, and you're very much in the moment rather than thinking of the future. And it's only now I'm kind of revisiting back. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but I think it's just when the time's right, just to take the time to talk about it with your family. I talk about it with mum and dad, talk about it with my siblings, the hospital team, and it's something that's going to affect and be with us for our whole life. And it's a difficult one, and there's a point where you feel a bit defined by it. So a little bit, Lewis was saying, I didn't want to hear about it, talk about it. It was just a bit too much. Whereas only now, over 10 years on, I've really started to revisit it. And so there is no wrong or right rule. I think just what works for you at the time.
George, what about you? Was there anything you wish you'd asked?
I think I generally left a lot of the questions to mum and dad, being 9 8, 9, 10 at the time. And then more recently, when I had a recurrence, that would have been 2018 now. Obviously, I was a lot older, so I felt more capable asking questions. But I think I would have liked to have asked if there was the possibility of it happening again. I think because I was so young and had no idea about how it worked, what it was, I just knew it was something bad that they were trying to get rid of, that I didn't really ask any sort of questions about the long term, as everyone's been saying before, that you just really sort of forget anything to do with the future so much as you really just focus on the present. I think the only thing that I thought about with regards to the future was I was sat there and saying, so does that mean I can't play football? Which obviously as a child you're quite keen on sports and things, and so I was quite concerned as to whether or not I would be able to play sport again. Fortunately, for that period of time, I was able to, and I also then got involved with the trust, which was fantastic because it just gave you a perfect opportunity to try something new and meet lots of people who you could discuss things with. I think one of the things I found very difficult was if I'd have been able to ask whether there were other people in my situation, because I was just I think it was just an ordinary children's ward, so there wasn't really anyone in the same situation as me, and obviously my friends from home weren't in the same situation, so it was quite isolating in that aspect. So in some ways I wish I'd have sat up and said, is there anyone I can talk to? Is there any sort of organisations out there that I could find out about? I think it's quite important to have that circle of information or friends or whatever it is, just to make sure that you know you're not the only person going through everything.
And you're both volunteers for the trust now, George and Chloe, having been supported as young people in the past. What do you think about the arrangements that are on trust trips to make sure young people feel able and capable of taking part?
Yeah, good question. So I guess it stems back, if I think about my first trip. So I was invited on my first trip when I was 16. I think it was 2008. And I was asked, by my social worker, about that Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust, and do you want to go sailing for 4 days on the Isle of Wight? And my first reaction was no, purely because, this was 2 years post-treatment. I just returned to school. I left school in year 8, went back in year 10, and that was that transition from childhood to teenagehood. So, my friends would be, it was just like it was like Doctor Who. I just went back to school and it was like a time machine, and everything's changed, and makeup boys and, drinking and, and so back then, I couldn't even walk. I struggled to walk down the road. I was on crutches pretty much for quite a few years after. I had transport to school. I hadn't got the bus on my own since treatment. I kind of lost a lot of confidence with friends and just doing anything kind of independently. So when I got asked to go on a trip, my first reaction was like sailing for me just felt too extreme. For some reason, I had quite negative thoughts, and my thought was that I was going to sit in the rowing boat with my crutches and just drift away. That was my perception of sailing, which is silly. And it was only through to a friend I met through hospital that was going, Rhiannon, and I spoke to my family, and they're all very positive. They're like, "It's Ellen MacArthur, it's sailing, it's exciting." And they spoke to the trust team, asked all the questions, because it was my first time kind of living away. My mum had been by my side the whole time, so to go stay away for 4 days was quite a big thing. And I still remember, driving down to the Isle of Wight, had a massive purple suitcase packed, but I was going away for 3 months, had my crutches, and when you first go on the boats, they're actually, the big yachts, you go down below, you've got cabins, there's a little kitchen, there's a table. It's still very small. It's like a living area. But I was very surprised how you could fit so much on a boat. And I was very surprised how quick I adapted to it. I think part of that was down to the crew. Like, being on a boat, it allows you to get to know everyone very quickly, get very comfortable, and then meeting other people that's had similar experiences. How I felt a bit alien at school, I didn't feel like that on the trust trip, so it felt a lot more easier to settle in. I know some of the boats now are really adaptive, where you can just step on, you haven't even got to climb over. When you're out sailing, you can clip on, so if you feel a little bit wobbly, so you can stay in the cockpit and clip on. The team are very good, like the skippers and the medics. There's always a medic volunteer on the trips as well. and the other young people, you know, you kind of look out for each other where, you know, if you're not comfortable doing something or it feels a bit too much, completely understand, and no one judges you for that. You just got to take, you know, what works for you. And yeah, it was a massive surprise, and it massively did build my confidence to the point where I hardly used my crutches as much on that 4-day trip, whereas at home I would never leave without my crutches. I was very dependent on a wheelchair. You know, my dad would like, you know, I was very much, I can't do it. It was just seemed a bit too much. But I think the distraction of sailing and being around people in similar circumstances just changed my perspective slightly. Yeah, it was a very surreal moment, I have to say.
And George, you do a bit of sailing away from the trust as well, am I right? So does that mean, have you found there are benefits more widely to do with sailing generally?
Yeah, so I'd say that certainly it was the trust that introduced me to sailing. I live in Wiltshire, so there's not really anywhere near the sea. Mum and Dad aren't water sport people, so we'd never really looked at a boat besides maybe on like the TV or something. And yeah, I probably was quite nervous when I first went. I'm sure Mum and Dad would say that I was. I think at that point in time, I was quite introverted and not very keen on talking to people. I think living in a small village and going to a small school meant that because there was very few people, there was also very few people who could relate to the situation. So it was quite a nice surprise to go on an Ellen MacArthur Trust trip and find all these people that I could talk to. As I said, I was worried about playing football again, and I had struggled to get back into it because whilst I was still able to walk and run around, it wasn't anywhere near in the same capacity. So I was really enjoyed being able to go on the boat and have a sense of almost a sense of purpose. So being able to work as part of the team to get the boat moving. And I think the others would probably agree. There's something about being on a boat that's quite therapeutic. Just getting away from anything to do with school or hospitals or anything. You're on a boat in the middle of the water. It's really nice and calm. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to get into sailing outside of the trust. Been to places all over the world, really, and finally decided to buy myself a little dinghy and keep going over there pretty much every week when the weather's okay to sail it now. I mean, following the amputation in 2018 with the recurrence, I was sat there thinking, well, I definitely can't do football now, and I can't. How am I going to do sailing? And the trust were extremely supportive, and they were able to reassure me that I'd be able to get onto the boats, and actually went and sort of practiced and felt quite confident being able to do that. I then ended up helping make a video to reassure people about getting on and off the boat for trust trips. So I think the trust does something. It's really hard to put a finger on what the trust does, other than really rebuilding your confidence and giving you that sense of independence and a big group of friendship, really. I think the fact that I've gone back for multiple trips and then decided to volunteer is quite a good testament to the fact of how important I think they've been in my life, and how enjoyable it is. So I can't really recommend them enough.
And coming from the perspective of someone who's been on one trip so far, Lewis, how did you find the accessibility and mobility of the whole thing?
Well, obviously being an above knee amputee myself, I was scared at first, knowing that I'd have to get onto a boat. Obviously, they rock in the water. I was thinking of everything, and I was like, no, I'm not going. No, I can't. And my youth support coordinator from the Teenage Cancer Trust helped my mind ease over to the point where I agreed to go. And on the way down, my head was all over the place. Don't know whether I was scared, anxious, or I don't know. I couldn't describe like how I really felt. But first getting onto that boat, from that first like step onto it, it was freedom, because with obviously being an above knee amputee, your hip relies on the movement of like how your prostate would move. So initially I was thinking I'm going to fall in, I'm going to do this, but it was perfectly fine. I had help from the skipper that was on my boat, and it was great. It is an amazing experience to be able to sit on a boat, because initially you have your leg amputated, you're like, right, there's so much that I'm not going to be able to do. But having that determination really does help, because knowing now that I can get on a boat perfectly fine, it's helped me take on each day as it comes now so I can take days to my full advantage. So now I'm currently playing more sports than I thought I'd be able to as an amputee, so like amputee football, and I'm also helping train towards becoming a Team G athlete in sprinting. So it's a lot of what I'm doing now is help from the trust itself, because they've helped me build up. They've helped me build up to be the person I am now. Whereas before I was determined to cover certain things as they came, but now I'm determined to take the world on, so to speak. It's like, this is like who I am now, and it's the way it's going to stay.
We finish every episode of Sound Waves with a game of best bit, worst bit, funniest bit, and I think we have time for one from each of you. So could I maybe ask George for a worst bit?
I'd say my worst bit is not being able to go on any trust trips at the moment and being stuck inside. I miss everyone, really.
I think that's all of our worst bits. Chloe, what's been one of your funniest bits?
Oh, there's so many. It's really hard to pick one. As I say, I've been a volunteer for 10 years now, and there's been so many trips.
It was all so funny.
Have you got a funny bit, Lewis?
Funniest bit, it's like the same as you. There's so much that goes on. You're constantly laughing. There's not one. It's just one whole funny experience to go on, because at first you're coming out your shell, you're like associating with other people, and you're constantly laughing. Like, you can't pick one single moment out of them all.
What you thought of one, Chloe, or best bit?
Best bit, I'll say, again, there's so many best bits, but I think I've got to take it back to my very first trip, where I had a 5-minute conversation from the pontoon to a boat with a person called Vicky, who had osteosarcoma, and she was helping for the trust, and she was in the early 20s. I was 16, and it was the first time I'd met another person that's had bone cancer. And we had a 5-minute conversation where she had similar surgery done. She talked about the first time, walking without using her crutches. And I remember getting back on the boat. I went to the cabin, took my stuff away, and I just sat on the bed and had this moment where it just felt so empowering to meet an adult who's had cancer as a child, to see almost like a future self, and just a bit of hope that she was walking independently. She was very social, very outgoing, and it was a real surreal moment, like you've met a celebrity. And I just had to take it in, and that was really the starting point, connecting with, since then, so many people on trust trips now. So that's got to be, I guess, the best bit.
That's it for this week. A huge thank you to George, Chloe, and Lewis for joining us, and to you for listening in. July is Sarcoma Awareness Month, so do take what's been talked about on board, do some research. I know I learned so much just from that half an hour chat we just had. This week at the Trust, we're launching our Virtual Summers Pen Pal network. If you're under 18 and want to write letters, draw doodles, make a new friend during the 2020 season, keep an eye out for how to get involved in the next few days on our social media. And elsewhere at the Trust this week, on Tuesday the 14th, there's the return of Sketchbook by Bethany's amazing watercolour class, so look out your brushes and paints and be inspired by what we find beneath the water's surface. On Thursday the 16th, check out Skipper John Davies teaching us how flags are used in sailing, and put your knowledge to the test. As ever, please do like and subscribe to the Soundwaves podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We can't wait for you to join us again next week.